Often in academic science, you're trying to pursue biologic insights. And in many cases, the discoveries that you make are discoveries in search of an application. Here, we took a somewhat different approach. We said, what's the unmet clinical need? And where can our science be best used to address that need in real time so that it doesn't take 10 years to develop a drug and it doesn't take 5 or 7 years to develop a diagnostic.
Welcome to another episode of From Lab to Patient, Garage to Market, with your host, Phil Crowley.
Hi, Phil Crowley here, and welcome to our podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. What we try to do is to bring you leaders and experts in the startup world, life sciences, technology, to help demystify the process for you, to let you know how to succeed, mistakes to avoid, issues to be cognizant of. And today I'm happy to have as my guest Dr. David Perlin, who's the Chief Scientific Officer, Executive Vice President, and a professor at the Center for Discovery and Innovation of Hackensack Meridian Health System. For those of you who are not in New Jersey, Hackensack Meridian is one of the leading health services companies in New Jersey, but the innovative work it does extends far beyond the borders of New Jersey. So please stay tuned, because at the end of our podcast, I'll be asking Dr. Perlin for a couple of suggestions that you, particularly in the life sciences, but perhaps innovators generally, will benefit from in terms of learning some success tricks. David, welcome.
Thanks, Phil. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Please tell us a bit about your background and the pathway that got you to Hackensack Meridian and what you're doing.
I'm an infectious disease researcher. I specialize in science translation and moving science innovation into the clinic. But prior to doing that, in the first half of my career, I spent as a basic scientist trying to understand the foundational elements of the biology of disease. So why do certain viruses, bacteria, fungi cause disease? Understand those insights. And then as I started doing that, I began to realize that as we learned a lot about disease mechanisms, there was an opportunity to apply that into the clinic. And the reason that you do health-related research is that people become ill and you want to help people become healthy. So to have the opportunity to do that was really important. And so I've spent the last half of my career taking science insights and then moving it into the clinic. I initially trained at Cornell. I was at Yale for some time, and then at Rutgers running a research institute called the Public Health Research Institute. And there we did a lot of foundational work to try to be able to understand disease and then overcome disease through diagnostics and therapeutics development. And the bottom line for all of that work is that you need to be able to impact patient care. And to do that, you have to understand what's happening to disease in patients, why they become ill. When they become ill, how do you treat them effectively? And so you needed to be in an environment where you had access to patients, access to clinicians, and a healthcare system that very much wants to bring innovation forward to be able to benefit their patients. And that's how I wound up at Hackensack. It became sort of a natural place for me to be able to take our insights, translate them, and impact clinical care.
Now, you've mentioned to me previously that the model that you have at Hackensack Meridian is very different from what happens in the typical university. And you were a senior administrator at a medical school before you came to Hackensack Meridian. How do you explain that uniqueness that you have been able to instill at Hackensack Meridian?
So I'm an academic scientist, and I trained as an academic scientist. And I think for just about every academic center in the US, if not throughout the world, the metric for success is scholarly pursuit. You're creating insights, you're trying to address problems. But for the most part, it's a very siloed type proposition whereby you create insights, you publish them, you get grants, but that's the end of it, because moving it into the clinic to be able to benefit patients has really been the domain of pharmaceutical companies, diagnostic companies, device manufacturers. And the difference that we've been trying to put in play at Hackensack is to say, well, that's not the end of our job. Our job is not to publish necessarily in science and nature, which we do, but really to make sure that the innovation we're creating is now being translated to directly impact patient care. And the place to do it is in a healthcare setting where they can take those insights and move them forward.
So it sounds like you kind of have a unique applications lab at Hackensack Meridian where you can take those great innovations that you're working on from a scholarly standpoint and then apply them to patient care in the Hackensack Meridian system.
That's absolutely true. And there's a foundational difference as well. And that is often in academic science, you're trying to pursue biologic insights. And in many cases, the discoveries that you make are discoveries in search of an application. Here, we took a somewhat different approach. We said, what's the unmet clinical need? And where can our science be best used to address that need in real time so that it doesn't take 10 years to develop a drug and it doesn't take 5 or 7 years to develop a diagnostic? But let's utilize the technology we have, the insights we have. We're in a renaissance era in science in terms of discovery and everything that we've learned. And in oncology, we have cellular therapy and all these tools available to us. So let's utilize these tools in real time, identify the problem, and then bring the science, the tools, everything forward that we need. And then there's one last component. And the last component is we say, when we're identifying unmet clinical need, we're bringing the researchers, but we're bringing everybody forward. That means we have partnerships with companies, with industry, at the onset of our solution driving process so that whoever can bring a solution to the table, that's who we want, and that's who we want to partner with, and that's what we want to deliver to our patients.
So it sounds like you partner with companies very early in the process.
Yeah, and I run 3 national centers of excellence that are funded by the NIH, and those national centers are focused on drug discovery, how to make next-generation drugs, next-generation antivirals, antibacterials, antifungal drugs. But the hallmark of that is the pairing of academic groups with industry to forge solutions and do it rapidly.
Now, it sounds like a very collaborative process. What's the process that you at Hackensack Meridian go through to select the companies that will be your partners in this collaboration? Do they come to you? Do you go out to the companies? How does that work?
I think it's a little bit of both. There are companies that I've worked with historically, mostly big pharma, who I've worked with on a number of programs. Some of them, they've come to me with new drugs or drug candidates or applications that they're trying to develop. And so I've worked with them through the years. And in many cases, as we define the problems, we're reaching out to companies and say, look, we have approaches. We're looking for potential solutions. Do you have anything that you're working on that would be relevant? Let's work together. And in many cases, we're bringing funds to the table to help those companies achieve their goals. And so it becomes a true partnership. It's a private-public partnership that works quite well and is really quite efficient.
One of the things that struck me, David, about your focus is it aligns with a methodology that I advise my clients on when they're putting together pitch decks. I call it the MSABC method because, as you well know, scientists love to talk about the science. They like to go 7 miles deep in the science. And I tell them that when they do that, the eyes of their investors glaze over because they just get overwhelmed, and that the MSABC method is what they need. And the M is for market. And what you so clearly articulated was to find what the market is not providing. What is the lack of care in the clinic that people need? And then focus on that and then try to solve that particular problem. And then going out and collaborating early with people who have ideas or who have other resources to bring projects forward is really very forward thinking. Can you give us a couple of examples? No proprietary or confidential information, but some of the sorts of projects that you have tended to handle to give our audience an idea of what's possible out there if people are collaborative.
One of the earliest examples when I came to Hackensack, and I came just before the pandemic, was that my groups had experience in developing diagnostics. And shortly before the pandemic hit the US, we started working on a real-time PCR assay for SARS-CoV-2 for COVID-19 based on what we were hearing from our colleagues in China about what they were dealing with a new SARS epidemic. And I was involved in SARS-1, back in 2003 in developing diagnostics. So, very early on, we recognized there was going to be a need for a diagnostic. So within short order, we developed our own diagnostic. We've got it approved under the FDA emergency use authorization. And in fact, we were one of the very first healthcare systems to have our own in-house RT-PCR rapid diagnostic, so we could tell if a patient was infected within an hour to 2 hours. Whereas most healthcare systems, especially in the early part of the pandemic, had to rely on either the health department, CDC, or others to be able to do that. And that could take days, if not weeks. So we wanted to use our innovation, our insights to rapidly address problems. We did the same thing in helping to develop one of the earliest convalescent plasma programs to address the need for therapy for our patients. We did something similar in looking at virus variants of concern. So as virus variants during the pandemic started mutating and we were getting immune escape variants, we put in place a surveillance program throughout the state in partnership, for example, with Quest Diagnostics, where every positive swab they got came to us for rapid molecular evaluation. We took that information, shared it with the health department, shared it with our clinical groups so that when viruses were arising, which were now resistant to, at the time, first-line therapy, which was the antibody therapy, we could inform our clinicians, you need to shift to different type of therapy. And the same thing, we wanted to share this information with the health department, with other groups in the state. And we use that approach routinely. And now in the drug discovery area, we're going after multi-drug resistant infections on the antibacterial side, which cause extensive amounts of morbidity and mortality. On the antiviral side, we're continuing to look at pandemic preparedness, pandemic response. So we're identifying problems and then applying solutions where we have early insights, and then where we need to develop those insights, we're partnering. And I will point out that we bring together true expertise in terms of, on the academic side, we have Nobel laureates, we have National Academy of Science members, we have who's who in science who are brought together to create insights. But what we do is we always say, how do we define success? What does success look like for us to really achieve our goal in a given program? And by defining success, we can bring these insightful academics together with our commercial partners, together with our clinical groups, and say, here's what success looks like. Here's what we have to drive. Let's work together, but be focused on achieving what we set out to do, which is to improve human health.
That's fantastic. And it sounds like you have kind of three legs of the stool. You have the academic researchers, you have the commercialization partners, and very importantly, you have the clinicians who are looking at the effects of this on actual patients. Let me just take a moment here to familiarize our audience with Crowley Law. We are a boutique law firm of very experienced business lawyers who are passionate about helping life sciences and other technology entrepreneurs avoid being taken advantage of as they move their great ideas to the marketplace. We love to see people like Dr. Perlin and his team take great ideas from the laboratory bench to the patient's bedside, or from the garage to the marketplace to enrich the lives of thousands or even millions of people. I'm a former research physicist. I did my work in superconductivity. And so I know and have experienced how hard it is to create new knowledge. And so I and my team have tremendous regard for the innovators in life sciences and other technologies. And as corporate lawyers, as a group, we understand how difficult it is to take even those great ideas from the lab out to the marketplace and actually commercialize them. And one of our passions is in dealing with innovators. I've encapsulated some of that knowledge in a book that you can obtain on Amazon. If you search for me on Amazon, Philip P. Crowley, you'll find the book Avoid Startup Failure. Learn the top 10 causes of failure for technology startups and how to turn them to your advantage. So we are dedicated to innovators, and if you have a project that you're working on and are looking for help on legal issues, please call us. We're here to help. You can reach us through our website at Crowley Law LLC.com. Now, back to David. David, how do you determine the companies that you're working with? I know you mentioned some of the big names, the big pharma companies. Do small companies have an opportunity to work with your team?
They do. And we have a number of small companies, small biotechs that are working with us at the discovery level to develop solutions. In many cases, we do tend to partner with large pharma, especially in the therapeutic space. And that's largely because as we're creating innovative solutions in terms of new molecules, whether it's small molecules or immunotherapies, the reality is that we want these solutions to wind up in the clinic, which means we have to be able to do clinical trials, and that's an expensive proposition. You know, you're looking at hundreds of millions of dollars to successfully complete clinical trials, for registration trials. And we need deep-pocketed individuals, often companies. Now, in some cases, we can use government agencies like BARDA or others who can partner for those types of programs. But fundamentally, to have a strong pharma partner up front, especially for a therapeutic solution, is really not just helpful, but it's critical if the goal is to deliver a solution for patients. That's what you want to do. Now, we, as you were mentioning in terms of your firm, we generate intellectual property. It's very important that as we generate our intellectual property, that we commercialize it. And often we need commercial partners who can take that IP and then bring it to life in the clinic. And for our programs, we typically can get into phase 1 clinical trials, some cases through phase 1, but to get to registration trials, especially for a new therapeutic, we need partners. We need partners who can get there. That's why the earlier you can partner with a group, the better off you are. And that's because one of the mistakes that academic groups tend to make is they'll have innovation that's leading to perhaps, let's say, a new antibiotic in my area or a new immunotherapy. They'll advance it thinking that, once they get to the clinic or to phase 1, that all of a sudden companies are going to buy it. But often what companies will tell them is, well, you haven't quite developed the product with the properties we're looking for. So to avoid that, at the earliest stage, you want to partner and identify what is the target product profile you're looking for that's going to create a sustainable solution that a company is going to want to develop and take through clinical development and then make available to the public. And that's what we want. We want to create sustainable solutions.
Right. It sounds like a very pragmatic approach to the development process. And I can appreciate, having been an assistant general counsel at Johnson & Johnson, that it's nice to be able to work with big pharma companies because you take a development and you pop it in the top, and it's almost like one of those mechanical toys where you have sales, you have marketing, you have regulatory affairs, you have distribution, manufacturing, all of the functions that you really need to make the product available to thousands or millions of people. But what about the diagnostics and medical device area? Is that an area where smaller companies might at least have an opening?
We tend to work with smaller companies in those areas. We work with large diagnostic companies and have for a long time. But in many cases, the early innovation is coming from these smaller companies. We'll partner with them. Our approach is to be able to take innovation wherever it's coming from. In many cases, it is small companies. Try to then obtain either federal support or other types of funding so that we can advance the technology. Now, for diagnostics, the route to registration is less expensive and the trials tend to be easier, and you don't have issues related to safety, toxicity, and other things like that there. You need to have good positive, negative predictability. You want the diagnostic to deliver something that's actionable on the clinical side in terms of therapy.
Right. Now, we know that artificial intelligence is impacting many areas of our lives, many areas of everybody's lives, and innovation in medical healthcare is no exception. How is that impacting the work that you and your groups are doing?
For us, especially in the drug discovery arena, we've used computational approaches for a very long period of time, mostly machine learning type approaches. But now with generative artificial intelligence and other types of platforms that are out there, we can just do a lot more. We can essentially do in situ drug discovery, where we're essentially exploring chemical space, millions, billions of chemicals, docking them into virtual targets that are derived from structural biology and other types of platforms. And then from that, start building out a drug discovery program. So it makes the development, certainly for small molecules, much more efficient, but it's also being used for cellular therapy, for other types of immunotherapy, for antibody development. So these tools for the life sciences are just extraordinary in terms of opening up space, creating innovation, but more importantly, creating efficiency in the way we address and solve problems. And I think that's what's been really exciting about using many of these tools. And then in other areas, like, for example, in our healthcare system, we have more than 300 use cases for artificial intelligence, everything from the patient, physician navigation stage through digital pathology, for a wide range of disease, and then looking at predictive algorithms for patients who are much more likely to have a successful outcome from certain types of therapies. So all of this is about exploring what we know and then what we really don't know about what we think we know. It seems a little strange, but there's a lot of hidden information in there, and what we need is ways to explore it, extract it, and probe it, and see where we can make it work.
Well, it sounds like you're positively disposed to artificial intelligence, as opposed to some of the people who see this as taking the doctors out of the clinic and substituting for them.
Not at all. I mean, look, it is all about improving health. We'll always need clinicians. We need people to interpret data. But at every level, physicians in particular, we're working extensively with our clinical community here. They need help, whether it's, in the early days, whether it's a textbook or guidelines from health agencies, to now artificial intelligence and other types of platforms which give them information that they can then use to assess the current health of their patient, how best to manage that patient. And I think really more importantly, to monitor how the patient is responding in the early phase of treatment to a given therapy. Are they responding in a way, rather than waiting to see, is the patient going to successfully complete therapy or fail therapy? Rather, look for individual markers where we can use many of these technologies to then discern the patient is responding as we expect and is likely to have a good outcome. The patient's not responding effectively, and therefore consider changing therapy so you get better outcome. And I can tell you, for example, with our lymphoma leukemia patients, we do daily cell-free liquid biopsies within our cancer center. We get a molecular turnaround, and the moment we see a signature for a refractory response, we see drug resistance markers come up, we change therapy. And when you do that, you get better outcomes, you get fewer relapses, and in the end, the patient is healthier.
That's amazing. It's so fascinating to hear how you're using all of the innovative tools to improve patient care. With all that, what do you like most about what you do?
I love the discovery piece. You mentioned technology. I love technology. To me, you can never have enough of it. What you really want to do is, like, as we were considering artificial intelligence, we never saw it as a bell and whistle. We always thought we have to incorporate this into our daily work practice, and it needs to become part and parcel of what we do. It's just another tool for us. And so I love the discovery phase. And frankly, I do like the fact that we can impact patients. I mean, it's a really satisfying. I sit on global boards, and there's a lot of unmet medical need out there. And I think that where we can make a difference, and we have in a number of areas, it's enormously satisfying. So I love coming to work. And I was once asked, well, when are you going to retire? And I said, well, I am retired because my understanding, at least from my parents, was that you retired to do what you wanted to do. Well, I'm doing what I want to do, and so I must be retired. So I love coming to work, and I love hearing about challenges and where we can really help people get healthy, become healthier, and prevent disease.
Fantastic. All right, David, I promised our audience that you would have a couple of suggestions, observations to help them navigate in this innovative space.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
Well, whether you're an academic looking to make a difference, or you're a small company or even a large company, my view always is be bold, but try to do something that's different. I've always said that I never want to do what other people are doing. I want them to do what we're doing. And so seek to be different, be bold. And I think one of the mistakes people make is that they're afraid to fail. And, failure is just part of the process towards success. And you have to be willing to be bold enough to make some decisions. If you fail along the way, you learn from that and you move forward from it. But really, if you're afraid to fail, you'll never succeed, because it is hard to be successful. But what you have to do is be resolute and really be razor focused on what is it that you're trying to achieve. And when you do that, then whether it's yourself to create the solution, it's partnership, wherever it's coming from, drive towards the solution. Be generous, but drive to the solution. And if you do that, ultimately you'll be successful. And I say this to my academic colleagues, and I say it to my commercial colleagues as well.
Super. That is certainly sage advice, David. And I want to thank you so much for sharing your perspectives. If our listeners want to get in touch and learn more about the great work that Hackensack Meridian is doing, or potentially find out how they can collaborate, how can they get in touch with you?
They can reach me by email. They just have to Google me up, and you'll have all the contact information from my research institute. And if it's not something we're doing, it's probably happening within our network, or if there are colleagues even outside our network who they would benefit from, I'm happy to connect them.
Super. Well, David, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your perspectives. And I hope for our viewers that you have benefited from this. If you have, please subscribe to our podcast. We'd like to have knowledgeable speakers like David as our guests. And remember, again, to look for the book, Avoid Startup Failure. It may help you. Leave a review. We'd appreciate that. And if you would, subscribe to our podcast so that you can come back and learn from other innovators in the healthcare and technology space. Thanks again for joining us today.
Thanks for listening to From Lab to Patient, Garage to Market, with host Phil Crowley. Please be sure to follow and leave a review or comment on your favorite platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on our website at CrowleyLawLLC.com. The information provided in this podcast does not constitute legal advice, and there has been no attorney-client relationship formed in the viewing or listening of this podcast episode. The information provided may constitute attorney advertising under applicable bar rules.